The phone rang at 6:47 a.m., which should have been my first warning. Nobody calls with good news before 7, unless someone's dead or in jail. Karen Wheeler? The voice was crisp, professional, completely unfamiliar. Yeah, that's me. I fumbled for the coffee maker with my free hand still half asleep. If this is about the Meridian salvage job, I already told your people the hull damage was worse than… Ms. Wheeler, my name is Julie Reynolds. I represent a government contractor with a diving opportunity that requires your specific expertise. Government contractor. I stopped reaching for the coffee and sat down at my kitchen table instead. In 15 years of commercial diving, I'd learned that when the government comes calling, it's either really good money or really bad news. Sometimes both. What kind of opportunity? The classified kind. Are you available to meet this morning? I looked around my apartment. Yesterday's wetsuit draped over a chair, equipment manuals scattered across the counter, the stubborn smell of salt water that never quite left my gear. My calendar was empty until Thursday, when I had a routine inspection job that would barely cover rent. How classified are we talking? The kind that requires extensive documentation before we can discuss specifics, but I can tell you the compensation would be substantial. Substantial. That was government speak for more money than you've ever seen. I'd been diving long enough to know that kind of cash usually came with a catch, but my bank account wasn't in a position to be picky. Where do you want to meet? 2 hours later, I was sitting in a sterile conference room in downtown Boston, staring at a stack of papers thick enough to stop a bullet. Julie Reynolds looked exactly like her voice sounded, sharp, efficient, probably 10 years older than me, with steel gray hair and the kind of suit that cost more than my monthly income. She watched me flip through the non-disclosure agreements with the patience of someone who'd done this before. This is a lot of paperwork for a diving job, I said, scanning a paragraph about federal prosecution for unauthorized disclosure. It's a lot of job for a diving job. She leaned forward slightly. Ms. Wheeler, how deep have you gone? Deepest was 2,800 meters. Salvage operation off the Grand Banks. Why? This mission requires a descent to 3,100 meters. I set the papers down. 3,100 feet was serious depth, the kind that separated weekend warriors from people who actually knew what they were doing. It was also the kind of depth where mistakes killed you in ways you'd never expect. What's down there? Sign the agreements and I'll tell you. I grabbed the pen, then stopped. What happened to the last guy you hired for this? Julie's expression stayed the same, but something flashed behind her eyes. Previous attempts to explore this site have been inconclusive. Inconclusive. Another government word that could mean anything from mission accomplished to everyone died horribly. But she'd said attempts, plural, which meant they'd been trying this for a while. How inconclusive? The kind that requires us to try a different approach. She slid another document across the table. This is the compensation package. I looked at the number and nearly choked on my coffee. 6 figures. More than I'd made in the last 2 years. Combined. The kind of cash that could pay off my equipment loans, cover rent for the next year, maybe even let me take a vacation somewhere that didn't involve getting soaked. What exactly am I diving to? An unusual geological formation in the North Atlantic. We need detailed documentation and sample collection if possible. Geological formation sounded innocent enough, but the money suggested otherwise. Nobody paid this much for rock samples, unless those rocks were doing something rocks weren't supposed to do. You said I'd have a partner? Another experienced diver, military background. You'll train together for 3 days before the mission. military background meant this wasn't just about geology. The government didn't send soldiers to look at interesting rocks. But the money was sitting right there on the table, and my landlord wasn't going to accept "I had a bad feeling" as an excuse for late rent. I signed the first page, then the second. Julie watched without any reaction as I worked my way through the stack, each signature pulling me deeper into whatever this really was. When I finished, she gathered the papers with the smooth movements of someone who'd done this many times before. "Excellent. You'll report to Norfolk Naval Base tomorrow at 800 hours. Bring your personal diving gear and enough clothes for a week." A week? I thought this was a single dive. 3 days of training, travel time to the site, the mission itself, and debriefing. She stood up, smoothing her suit. "Ms. Wheeler, I want to be clear about something. This mission is classified at the highest levels. The formation we're investigating is unlike anything previously documented. Your expertise in extreme depth operations makes you uniquely qualified for this work." Uniquely qualified. I'd heard that line before, usually right before someone wanted me to tackle a job that other divers had turned down, but the way she said it felt different, less like she was buttering me up and more like she was just stating the obvious. "What makes this formation so unusual?" Julie paused at the door. "You'll understand when you see it. But Ms. Wheeler, I want you to know that we came to you for a reason. Your track record with tough jobs speaks for itself." After she left, I sat alone in the conference room, staring at the copy of the compensation agreement. The money was real. I'd checked the account information twice, but something about Julie's careful word choices bugged me. Earlier dives had come up empty. The rock formation was completely new. They'd come to me personally. I thought about my father, who'd built his name taking jobs other divers wouldn't touch. He'd always said that the best opportunities looked like the worst ideas, and that knowing the difference was what kept professionals breathing. The problem was, I wasn't sure which category this fell into. But the money was already in my account, and I'd signed papers that probably made backing out a federal crime. Whatever was waiting for me at 3,100 meters, I was stuck now. I just hoped Julie's definition of inconclusive didn't include fatal. I pulled into Norfolk Naval Base at 07:45, 15 minutes early because showing up late to a military facility seemed like a bad way to start a job that was already giving me weird vibes. The guard at the gate checked my ID 3 times and made 2 phone calls before waving me through to a parking area that looked like it was designed for people who weren't planning to come back anytime soon. The building they pointed me toward was pure government concrete. No windows, no signs, just a number stenciled next to a door that needed a key card I didn't have. I was standing there wondering if I should knock when the door opened, and a guy about my age stepped out, looking just as confused as I was. "You must be Karen Wheeler," he said, extending his hand. "Tim Singh. I'm guessing you're here for the same mysterious diving project that nobody wants to explain." I shook his hand, already appreciating how direct he was. "That's me. Please tell me you know more about this than I do." "Afraid not. They told me we'd be testing new deep-sea exploration equipment, but the paperwork I signed could have been written in ancient Greek for all the sense it made." He had a slight Canadian accent and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested military training. "How much did they tell you?" "Geological formation, 3,100 meters. Substantial compensation." I counted off on my fingers. "Oh, and it's classified enough to land me in federal prison if I talk about it." "Same here, minus the geological part. They just said, 'specialized equipment testing,' and handed me a stack of forms." Tim glanced around the empty parking lot. "You ever work with the military before?" "A few contracts here and there." "You?" "Canadian Navy.
8 years. But I've never seen this level of secrecy for equipment testing. He lowered his voice. Usually when they're this cagey, it means either the equipment is experimental enough to kill you, or they're not actually testing equipment. Before I could respond, the door opened again, and a tall black man in a white coat stepped out. He had that commanding presence you'd expect from a doctor, but something about his smile seemed practiced.
Ms. Wheeler, Mr. Singh, welcome to Norfolk. I'm Dr. Ryder Adams, and I'll be overseeing your training and medical clearance for this mission. He gestured for us to follow him inside. I trust you both had uneventful travels? The inside of the building matched the clinical exterior, harsh overhead lighting, bland beige walls, and that sharp smell of hospital-grade cleaner. Ryder walked us down a hallway lined with numbered doors, no names in sight. We passed what looked like exam rooms and offices crammed with unfamiliar equipment. Dr. Adams, Tim said as we walked, can you tell us more about this geological formation we're supposed to investigate? All mission details will be covered in your briefing this afternoon, Ryder replied without breaking stride. First, we need to get you both familiar with the specialized equipment you'll be using. He stopped at a door marked Training Bay 3 and swiped his keycard. The room beyond was huge, easily the size of an airplane hangar, with a deep pool taking up most of the floor space. But what grabbed my attention were the 2 submarines sitting on platforms beside the water. I'd seen plenty of diving equipment in my career, but these machines were unlike anything I'd worked with before. They looked like oversized torpedoes with viewing bubbles, sleek and clearly expensive. Each one was maybe 12 feet long with stubby fins and what looked like multiple backup systems for everything. These are prototype deep submersible vehicles, Ryder explained, walking over to the nearest one. Single pilot operation, rated for depths exceeding 4,000 meters, with life support systems capable of sustaining operations for up to 18 hours. Tim whistled low. 18 hours? That's a lot of life support for equipment testing. The mission parameters require extended operational capability, Ryder said, which wasn't really an answer. Each vehicle is equipped with advanced navigation systems, emergency ascent protocols, and communication arrays designed to maintain contact with surface operations, even at extreme depths. I walked around one of the subs, checking out the thick viewing window and what looked like sample collection arms tucked against the hull. These are built for more than just testing. What exactly are we supposed to be collecting down there? Geological samples, primarily. Documentation of the formation's structure and composition. Ryder opened a panel on the side of the sub, revealing an interior that looked more like a spacecraft than diving equipment. The formation we're investigating is quite unique, requiring specialized documentation protocols. Unique how? I asked. Ryder's pause was barely noticeable, but I caught it. The briefing this afternoon will cover all mission specifics. For now, let's focus on getting you familiar with the equipment. The next 3 hours were a crash course in operating technology that was probably worth more than my apartment. The subs were incredibly sophisticated. Multiple backup systems for everything. Emergency protocols that seemed designed for situations way beyond normal equipment failure. And communication systems that Ryder kept stressing were essential for mission success. What bothered me was how much time we spent on emergency ascent procedures. Ryder walked us through at least 6 different scenarios for rapid surface return, including protocols for complete system failure and something he called emergency extraction procedures that meant abandoning the sub entirely. This seems like a lot of emergency planning for a geological survey, Tim said during a break, echoing my thoughts exactly. Deep sea operations always require comprehensive safety protocols, Ryder replied, but he was already moving on to the next system demonstration. By lunch, I was getting seriously uncomfortable with how evasive everyone was being. Tim and I grabbed sandwiches from a vending machine and found a quiet corner of what passed for a break room. "This doesn't feel right," Tim said quietly, keeping his voice low even though we were alone. "I've done equipment testing before, and they usually can't shut up about the technical specifications and performance parameters they want you to evaluate. Yeah, and geological surveys don't usually require 18 hours of life support and 6 different emergency escape plans." I picked at my sandwich, not really hungry. "Plus, did you notice how he keeps calling it the formation, like there's only one?" Tim nodded. "And the way he avoided your question about what makes it special. In my experience, scientists love talking about unusual geological features. You think they're lying about what we're diving to? I think they're not telling us something important." Tim glanced toward the door. "I've heard rumors back at my base about other diving teams being put together for classified projects. Specialized personnel, high-level clearances, that kind of thing. What happened to those teams? That's the thing. Nobody knows. They just disappear into classified assignments and never come back to regular duty." He lowered his voice even more. "One of the guys in my unit said his buddy got recruited for something similar about 6 months ago. Haven't heard from him since." A cold feeling crept up my back that had nothing to do with the AC. "How many teams?" "At least 3 that I know of, probably more. All experienced deep-sea divers, all recruited for geological surveys or equipment testing." Before I could say anything, the door opened and Ryder walked in, wearing his usual professional smile. "Ready to continue? We have a lot of ground to cover before tomorrow's practical exercises." The afternoon session covered communication protocols and what Ryder called backup plans. We spent an hour learning how to work emergency beacons, another hour on what to do if we lost contact with the surface, and way too much time on procedures for surprise changes to the mission. "What kind of unexpected parameters?" I asked. "Deep-sea operations can present unforeseen challenges," Ryder said. "Equipment malfunction, environmental hazards, navigation difficulties. The key is maintaining communication with surface operations and following established protocols. But what if communication is lost entirely?" Another pause. "The trucks have backup communication systems. Losing all contact would be pretty unusual. But if it happens, follow emergency ascent protocols and return to the surface immediately." Tim and I looked at each other. For equipment that was supposed to be foolproof, we were spending way too much time learning what to do when things went wrong. The second day was hands-on training in the pool, learning to operate the subs in controlled conditions. The vehicles handled like a dream, quick to respond, steady, with amazing visibility through the viewing ports. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being trained for something much more dangerous than anyone was letting on. During another break, I overheard Ryder talking to someone on his phone in the hallway outside the training bay. "Containment procedures are in place. Yes. Both subjects are responding well to training. No, they haven't asked about the previous teams." I backed away from the door before he could catch me listening, but the word subjects stuck in my head. Not divers or personnel or trainees. Subjects. That evening, Tim and I grabbed dinner at a diner off base, both of us needing to get away from the sterile military environment for a few hours. "I keep thinking about what you said," Tim told me over coffee. "About the other diving teams. If this is just geological research, why all the secrecy? Why not publish the findings? And why do they need multiple teams? If it's just documentation and sample collection, one good team should be enough." I stirred my coffee absently. Unless the first teams didn't come back. Or came back with information they didn't want getting out. We sat in silence for a while, both of us probably thinking the same thing. that we'd gotten ourselves into something we didn't really get, and walking away now might not be possible. "The money's already in my account," I said finally. "Mine too, and I signed enough paperwork to make backing out a court-martial offense. So we're committed." "Looks like it." Tim signaled for the check. "But that doesn't mean we have to go in blind. Tomorrow's our last day of training. Maybe we can get some real answers." The third day started with Julie Reynolds showing up out of nowhere during our morning equipment check. She watched us run through pre-dive procedures with that same sharp, evaluating look I remembered from when we first met. "How are they progressing, Dr. Adams?" she asked. "Both subjects." Ryder caught himself. "Both divers are showing excellent aptitude with the equipment. They should be ready for deployment tomorrow." "Deployment?" I looked up from the sub's control panel. "I thought this was a research dive." "It is," Julie said smoothly. "Dr. Adams simply means you'll be ready for the research deployment to the dive site." But I'd caught the slip, and from Tim's expression, so had he. This wasn't research. This was some kind of military operation, and we were the latest in a series of people being sent to do something that apparently needed containment procedures and emergency extraction protocols. "Ms. Reynolds," Tim said carefully, "can you tell us anything more about this geological formation? It would help to know what we're looking for down there." Julie and Ryder's eyes met for just a beat too long. "All mission specifics will be covered in tomorrow's final briefing," Julie said. "For now, focus on mastering the equipment. Your success depends on being completely comfortable with these systems." "Our success. Not the mission's success. Ours." As Julie walked away, I noticed Ryder watching us with what almost looked like pity. For just a second, his professional front dropped, and I caught something that might have been regret. But then it disappeared, and he went back to talking about emergency protocols and backup plans, getting us ready for a mission that nobody would explain and that other divers apparently hadn't come back from. Whatever we were really diving to tomorrow, it wasn't some rock formation, and I was starting to think we weren't coming back. The research vessel, Meridian's Edge, sliced through the North Atlantic swells like it had somewhere urgent to be, which I guess it did. 12 hours out from Norfolk, and the ocean had turned into that endless gray blue that makes you feel like you're sailing off the edge of the world. No land in any direction, just water and sky, meeting at a horizon that looked exactly the same as it had 6 hours ago. I stood at the bow, watching the crew work with the kind of smooth operation that comes from serious training. These weren't your typical research vessel sailors. Too many buzz cuts, too much tactical gear mixed in with the standard maritime equipment. The radio chatter I could overhear was all call signs and coordinates, nothing that sounded like normal scientific expedition communication. Tim joined me at the rail, looking just as troubled as I felt. "Notice anything strange about the equipment?" I followed his look toward the back of the boat, where several pieces of machinery sat under heavy tarps. What I could see didn't look like standard oceanographic gear. Too sharp-edged, too military. "That's not sample collection equipment." "Nope. Looks more like deployment systems. The kind you'd use for..." He trailed off, probably thinking the same thing I was. "The kind you'd use for weapons or surveillance equipment." "Ms. Wheeler." "Mr. Singh." Julie Reynolds appeared beside us with that unsettling ability she had to move silently. "We're approaching the coordinates. Time for your final briefing." She led us to a conference room below deck that had been converted into a command center. Banks of monitors showed sonar readings, water temperature data, and navigation charts. But it was the central display that made my stomach drop. The sonar image showed the ocean floor at 3,100 meters, and there was definitely something wrong with it. A massive circle, perfectly round, cut into the seafloor like someone had used a giant cookie cutter. The thing was huge, nearly 200 meters across, and the sonar couldn't find the bottom. "What the hell is that?" Tim said exactly what I was thinking. Julie pulled up a chair, looking more serious than I'd ever seen her. 3 years ago, deep-sea monitoring stations picked up massive seismic activity in this area. When we went to investigate, we found this. I stared at the sonar image, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. The edges of the circle were too clean, too exact. Ocean floors don't create perfect geometric shapes. Erosion, sediment, tectonic activity. Everything about the deep sea makes irregular, natural formations. This looked like someone had carved it. "How deep does it go?" I asked. "We don't know. Our deepest sonar penetration shows the walls continuing down past 4,000 meters, but the readings become unreliable beyond that point." Julie switched to a different display showing temperature data. The water characteristics around the formation are also unusual. Tim leaned forward, studying the thermal readings. "These temperature changes don't make sense. You've got areas that are 15 degrees warmer than the surrounding water, but they're nowhere near any thermal vents." "Exactly. The temperature differentials follow no known geological patterns, and they seem to shift over time." Julie's voice carried a tension I hadn't heard before. "The formation defies every geological model we've applied to it." I couldn't stop staring at the sonar image. Something about that perfect circle made my skin crawl, like spotting a spider web and knowing the spider was lurking close by. "You said earlier attempts to explore this were inconclusive. What exactly happened?" Julie paused, which was the first time I'd seen her show any uncertainty. "We've sent recon drones into the opening. Top-tier units, military-grade equipment built for extreme depth operations. And the first 3 functioned normally until they reached approximately 3,500 meters. Then their signals simply stopped. No malfunction warnings, no gradual system failures. They just went silent." Tim and I looked at each other. "Equipment failure?" "That was our initial assumption. We sent more advanced units with redundant communication systems and emergency ascent protocols. Same result. They descend to a certain depth, and then..." She gestured at the sonar display. "Nothing." "How many drones have you lost?" 17. The number hit me hard. 17 pieces of military-grade equipment just gone. That wasn't equipment failure. That was something actively messing with the drones. "Which is why we need human pilots," Julie continued. "Drones follow programmed parameters. Humans can adapt, make decisions, respond to unexpected situations, or get killed by whatever's destroying your drones," I said. "The submersibles you've been training with are far more advanced than the drones. Better shielding, more powerful communication arrays, and most importantly, human judgment to recognize and avoid potential threats." I checked the thermal readings again, watching how the warm spots grouped around the circle's edges. "What's your theory about what made this?" Another pause. Julie was definitely holding something back. "There are several possibilities. Underwater volcanic activity, though we've found no magma signatures. Seismic events, though the formation's precision argues against natural causes. Or what? Or something we don't have a classification for yet." Tim stood up, walking to the window that showed nothing but endless ocean. "You're asking us to dive into something that's destroyed 17 pieces of military equipment, shows weird thermal characteristics, and makes no geological sense. What aren't you telling us?" Julie's professional mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something that looked like real concern. "Mr. Singh, the truth is that we don't know what you'll find down there. That's why we need you to go." And if we end up like your drones? The submersibles have emergency ascent systems that can bring you to the surface even if all other systems fail. You're not going down there defenseless. I stared at the sonar image again, trying to picture myself dropping down into that flawless circle of black water. Every gut feeling I'd built up over 15 years of risky dives was yelling at me to stay away, but the cash was already sitting in my account, and pulling out now would likely mean federal charges. What exactly do you want us to do down there? Document everything. The interior structure, any unusual formations or materials, water characteristics, anything that might explain how this was created. Julie pulled up a mission checklist on another monitor. If possible, collect samples of the wall material. But your primary objective is reconnaissance and safe return. Safe return, Tim repeated. Like the drones. You're not drones. You can think, adapt, make decisions based on what you encounter. That's why human exploration is necessary. I looked at the mission parameters, focusing on the emergency procedures and quick ascent protocols. How long do we have down there? Maximum mission time is 6 hours, but you're authorized to abort and surface immediately if you encounter any threats or system malfunctions. 6 hours in something that had eaten 17 military drones. I thought about my father, who'd always said that the ocean kept its secrets for good reasons. Looking at that perfect circle on the sonar, I was starting to think he was right. When do we go? Dawn. The submersibles are being prepped now, and weather conditions will be optimal in the morning. Julie stood up, her professional demeanor fully restored. I want to be clear about something. This mission is voluntary. If either of you wants to withdraw, you can do so without penalty. But we all knew that was bullshit. We'd signed too many papers, seen too much classified stuff. The only way out was 6 feet under. Tim kept looking out at the water. 17 drones. 17, Julie confirmed. I looked at the sonar image one more time, at that perfect circle cutting into the ocean floor like a wound in the earth itself. Tomorrow morning, Tim and I would descend into whatever had created it. I just hoped we'd be coming back up. The sun was just breaking the horizon when Tim and I climbed into our respective submarines, the ocean around us looking deceptively calm in the early morning light. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, running final system checks and securing our communication lines to the surface. "Radio check, Diver 1, came Julie's voice through my headset. "Loud and clear," I responded, watching Tim give a thumbs up from his sub about 20 feet away. "Diver 2, radio check." "All good here," Tim's voice crackled through the comm system. "Ready for descent." I took a deep breath and hit the ballast controls. That steady drop into the ocean usually settled my nerves, but something felt off today. The water was crystal clear, way clearer than anything I'd seen in the North Atlantic. Normally you'd get bits of debris, plankton, all that ocean mess that turns deep water green or gray. This looked like we were going down through pure glass. "Passing 500 meters, I reported. "Water clarity is exceptional." "Confirmed," Tim's voice came through clearly. "I can see the bottom of your sub from here. This visibility is weird for these waters." He was right. At 500 meters, we should barely be able to see each other, but I could make out his submarine's hull details like we were in a swimming pool. The sunlight was cutting deeper than it should, creating an almost ghostly blue glow around us. "Surface control. Are you seeing these visibility readings?" I asked. "Confirmed, Diver 1. Proceed with descent." At 3,000 feet, we started seeing the usual deep-sea life. Jellyfish drifting past like alien ghosts. The occasional fish with oversized eyes adapted for the darkness. Normal stuff that made me feel better about the whole situation. Maybe this really was just a weird geological formation. But as we dropped deeper, something started bothering me. The marine life was thinning out faster than it should. By 4,500 feet, I was seeing maybe one fish every few minutes, instead of the steady stream you'd expect. Tim, you noticing the wildlife situation? Yeah, it's getting pretty empty out here. Could be the water temperature variations we saw on the charts. At 2,000 meters, I realized I hadn't seen any sea life in the past 10 minutes. Nothing. Not even the tiny organisms that usually create that background shimmer in deep water. It was like we were dropping through a dead zone. Surface control. We're seeing unusual marine life patterns. Very sparse population as we approach target depth. Noted Diver 1. Continue descent. Tim's voice came through with fresh tension. Karen, my depth gauge is showing some weird readings. According to this, the ocean floor should be right below us, but I'm not seeing anything on sonar. I checked my own gear and felt my stomach drop. The depth gauge was spinning between readings that made no sense, sometimes showing we were at 2,500 meters, sometimes jumping to 3,000, then back down. Same here. Everything's going haywire. Surface control. We're getting inconsistent depth readings. Can you confirm our position? Static answered us for several seconds before Julie's voice came through. You're at 2,700 meters, approaching the formation. Prepare for visual contact. And then I saw it. The edge of the circle appeared below us like we were approaching the rim of a huge well. But calling it a circle didn't capture how perfectly round it was. The edges looked like they'd been cut with a laser, creating a geometric precision that made my skin crawl. Ocean floors don't form perfect shapes. Ever. Jesus Christ. Tim's voice was barely a whisper. Are you seeing this? I steered my sub to the edge and looked down into the opening. My lights, which could brighten objects 200 meters away, just vanished into the darkness below. It was like staring into a void that consumed light itself. Surface control. We have visual on the formation. It's definitely artificial. No way this is natural. The walls of the opening were smooth and metallic looking, with a surface that seemed to change and ripple in my lights. Not rock, not sediment, not anything I'd ever seen on the ocean floor. The material looked almost living, like it had a pulse. Tim's submarine moved to the opposite side of the circle. The walls are warm. My thermal sensors are picking up heat signatures 15 degrees above normal water temperature. I checked my own readings and found the same thing. Whatever this material was, it was making heat. Rocks don't do that. Metal doesn't do that at these depths. I'm going in first, Tim announced. Give me a 30-second lead, then follow. Copy that. Be careful down there. I watched Tim's lights vanish into the blackness like he was being absorbed by the ocean itself. Within seconds, I could barely make out the glow from his submarine, and we were only maybe 50 meters apart. Tim, how's your visibility? Terrible. It's like the water down here absorbs light. I can barely see my own instrument panel. 30 seconds later, I followed him over the edge. The drop into the formation was unlike anything I'd experienced in 15 years of deep sea diving. The darkness wasn't just missing light. It felt heavy, almost solid, pushing against my viewing port like it was trying to get inside. My submarine's lights, which had been working perfectly moments before, seemed to grow weaker as soon as I entered the opening. Surface control. We're inside the formation. Visibility is severely limited. Static. Surface control, do you copy? More static, with what sounded like distant voices underneath, but I couldn't make out any words. Tim, are you getting anything from the surface? Negative. Radio's dead. I'm getting some kind of interference, but it doesn't sound like normal static. He was right. The noise coming through my headset had an almost rhythmic quality, like whispers in a language I couldn't understand. I tried adjusting frequencies, but every channel produced the same eerie background sound. My instruments were going completely crazy now. The depth gauge was spinning like a slot machine. The compass was pointing in 3 different directions at once, and my pressure readings suggested we were somehow experiencing less water pressure than we should at this depth, which was physically impossible. "Tim, what's your depth reading?" "I've got no idea. My instruments are showing everything from 3,000 to 5,000 meters, but the pressure gauge says we're at 1,500. None of this makes sense." I looked ahead and could barely make out his lights, maybe 40 meters away. The walls of the formation were definitely changing as we dropped deeper. What had looked metallic at the surface was now taking on a more organic appearance, with a texture that reminded me of skin. Worse, it seemed to be pulsing with a faint bioluminescent glow that made my stomach turn. "The walls are moving," I reported, not sure if anyone could hear me. "I see it too. This isn't geological, Karen. This is something else entirely." We'd been climbing down for what felt like 20 minutes, but my chronometer showed only 5 minutes had passed. Time itself seemed warped inside the rock formation. According to my instruments, we should have hit the bottom by now, but there was still nothing below us, except endless darkness. "Tim, how much further do you want to go?" His response took too long, and when it finally came, his voice sounded off. "Far away. I can see something ahead. Something huge." I tried to see past my lights but couldn't make out anything except the dim glow from his submarine. "What kind of something?" "I'm not sure. It's moving." A cold feeling went through me that had nothing to do with the water. "Moving how?" "Just moving. Like it's alive." Tim's lights had gone still. His sub hung there in the water about 50 meters ahead of me, and when I called his name over the radio, nothing came back. I was trapped down here in the black, 3,000 meters below the surface, inside something that sure as hell wasn't any rock formation, with my partner gone quiet and my instruments showing readings that made no sense. And somewhere in the black ahead of me, something was stirring. The water around me had turned into something that shouldn't exist. 1 second, I'd feel my sub getting shoved sideways by a current that seemed to be flowing upward. The next, I'd hit a pocket of water so hot my thermal sensors started flashing warnings. Physics didn't work like this. Water doesn't just decide to flow in random directions 3,000 meters down. "Surface control, do you copy?" I tried again, adjusting every frequency I could think of. Nothing but that weird static with voices underneath it. The voices were getting clearer though, which somehow made it worse. I couldn't understand the words, but they had rhythm, like people having a conversation just out of hearing range. Tim's lights hadn't moved in 5 minutes. His sub was just floating there in the water like he'd hit pause on the whole mission. I pushed my thrusters forward, trying to close the gap between us. "Tim, what's your status?" "Dead air. Not even static on his frequency." My depth gauge was having a complete breakdown, spinning between readings that made no sense. 4,000 meters, then back to 2,500, then jumping to 6,000 like we'd somehow fallen through the ocean floor into empty space. The pressure readings were even worse. According to my instruments, I was experiencing less water pressure than I should at 1,500 meters, which was physically impossible. I looked at the walls around us, and my stomach dropped. What had started as smooth, metallic surfaces was changing into something that looked disturbingly organic. The material seemed to pulse with its own light, a faint blue-green glow that reminded me of deep-sea creatures. But this wasn't bioluminescence from some fish or jellyfish. This was the structure itself, breathing light in slow, steady rhythms.
The surface looked like skin, wet, living flesh stretched over something huge. "This is not a geological formation," I said out loud, not caring if anyone could hear me. We were inside something alive, something so big that what we'd thought was a circular opening in the ocean floor was probably just an entrance. Or a mouth. I pushed that thought away and focused on reaching Tim. 40 meters now. I could see his submarine clearly through the strange, heavy darkness. But something was off about how it sat there. It wasn't drifting with the current like it should be. It was completely motionless, like something was keeping it in place.
"Tim, I'm approaching your position. Please respond." My radio crackled, and for a moment I thought I'd gotten through to him. But the sound that came through wasn't Tim's voice. It was something else. Something that might have been trying to form words, but didn't quite know how human speech worked. I cut the radio and relied on my thrusters to move closer. 30 meters. 20. I could see Tim's viewing port now, and there was definitely someone inside. But he wasn't moving. Not even the small movements you'd expect from someone checking instruments or adjusting position. The water around his submarine was different too. It had a strange quality to it, like heat waves rising off summer pavement. Except we were in near freezing water, thousands of meters down. My thermal sensors were going crazy, showing temperature spikes that jumped from 2 degrees to 25 degrees and back down again. 15 meters away, I could see Tim clearly through his viewing port. He was staring straight ahead at something I couldn't make out yet, his face drained of all color. His mouth hung open like he was trying to scream, but his body had gone rigid. His hands clutched the controls with such force that I could see his white knuckles even through the thick glass. "Tim!" I shouted into my radio, not caring that it probably wasn't working. "Tim! Can you hear me?" He didn't respond, didn't even blink. He just kept staring at whatever was in front of him with an expression of complete terror. I moved my sub to get a better angle and see what he was looking at. The water ahead was darker than anything I'd ever seen, like it swallowed light instead of just blocking it. My submarine's floods, which could light up objects 200 meters away, just vanished into that blackness like they'd never existed. But there was something moving in there, something huge. At first I thought it might be another submarine, maybe one of the lost drones they'd told us about. But as my eyes got used to the pitch-black water, I started to make out shapes that were definitely not mechanical. Curves that flowed too smoothly, surfaces that seemed to move and change as I watched. Whatever Tim was staring at was alive, and it was huge. My lights could only show me pieces of it at a time, a section of what might have been a tentacle thicker than my entire submarine, a surface that looked like it was covered in scales the size of dinner plates, something that could have been an eye but was too big for me to see all of it at once. The thing was watching us. I was sure of it. Even though I couldn't see its whole body, I could feel its focus like pressure pushing against my submarine's hull. It knew we were there, and it was deciding what to do about us. My hands were shaking as I tried to back away from Tim's position, but my thrusters weren't working right. The water currents down here followed their own rules, shoving me in directions that made no sense with the controls I was using. "Tim, we need to get out of here," I whispered into my radio, knowing he couldn't hear me but needing to say something. "We need to surface right now." That's when Tim's radio crackled to life. It wasn't his voice. It was someone screaming. High, desperate, filled with terror that shouldn't come from any human throat. The scream lasted maybe 3 seconds before cutting off completely, leaving nothing but whispered voices in the static. Tim's submarine was still motionless, but now I could see his viewing port starting to fog up from the inside. The temperature readings around his sub were climbing into ranges that would cook anyone inside within minutes. I had to get to him. Whatever was happening, I couldn't just leave him there. But as I pushed my thrusters forward, something moved in the darkness ahead. Something so huge that my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It wasn't approaching. It was already there. Had probably been there the whole time, and I was just now seeing enough of it to understand how completely screwed we were. The creature was looking at me now. I could feel its attention turn from Tim to my submarine, and every instinct I'd developed in 15 years of dangerous diving started yelling at me to run. But Tim was still out there, still trapped in his submarine, and I couldn't just abandon him. Even if whatever was watching us was bigger than anything that should exist in Earth's oceans. Even if my instruments were telling me we were somehow deeper than the ocean floor itself. Even if the walls around us were alive. I pushed my thrusters forward, fighting against the strange currents to get closer to Tim's submarine. 20 meters, 15. The water around his sub was doing that shimmer thing again, like heat waves, and my temperature readings were jumping all over the place. "Tim, I'm right here," I said into my radio, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. "Whatever you're looking at, we need to go. Now." Through his viewing port, I could see his face clearly now. He wasn't just scared. He was frozen in complete terror, staring at something ahead of him with his mouth open like he was trying to scream but couldn't make any sound. His hands were locked on his controls, knuckles white through the thick glass. I moved around to see what had him so paralyzed. The darkness ahead wasn't empty. Something huge was moving through it, so big that my brain kept trying to make sense of what I was seeing and failing completely. My lights would catch a section of what looked like scaled skin, then a curve that could have been part of a limb, then something else that couldn't be described. But it was the eyes that froze me solid. Two huge shapes glowing with their own pale blue light, each one easily the size of my entire submarine. They weren't looking at Tim anymore. They were staring straight at me, and I could feel the intelligence behind them pressing down on my hull like tons of water. This thing wasn't just some deep-sea creature that had wandered into the formation. It was watching us on purpose, studying us, deciding what to do with the two tiny metal objects that had invaded its territory. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, backing my sub away as slowly as possible. "What are you?" The creature moved in the water, and more of its shape came into view under my lights. Tentacles thicker than subway cars flowed through the darkness with smooth, liquid movements. The main body stretched so far I couldn't make out where it ended, just endless curves and surfaces that disappeared into the black. Tim's radio suddenly burst with sound, a scream so high and frantic it barely seemed human. The noise lasted 3 seconds that felt like forever before cutting off completely, leaving nothing but that soft static. I glanced back at Tim's submarine and saw his viewing port beginning to fog up from the inside. The temperature readings around his sub were jumping into ranges that would kill someone within minutes. "Tim!" I shouted into my radio. "Tim! Get out of there!" But he wasn't moving. He was still staring at the creature, with that same expression of frozen terror, like his mind had just shut down completely. The creature's attention turned back to Tim's submarine, and I watched in horror as something moved through the darkness toward him. Not tentacles this time, something else, something I couldn't quite see but could feel displacing massive amounts of water. The impact came without warning. Something slammed into Tim's submarine with a force that sent shockwaves through the water around me. The sound was awful, metal crushing and tearing like aluminum foil being crumpled by giant hands. Tim's sub spun away into the darkness, pieces of hull and equipment trailing behind it like a comet tail. The lights went out on his submarine, and Tim Singh disappeared into the black water. I sat there for maybe 2 seconds, my brain trying to process what I'd just seen. Tim was dead. Something had just killed him right in front of me, and now those massive bright eyes were turning back in my direction. The creature was hunting us, not just defending its territory or reacting to threats, actively tracking down human beings with intelligence and purpose. I slammed my thrusters to full power and started racing toward the surface as fast as my sub could manage. Behind me, I could feel the water displacement as something massive began moving in my direction. The walls of the structure rushed past me as I climbed, their living surface pulsing with that sick blue-green glow. My depth gauge was still spinning like crazy, but I didn't care about the readings anymore. I just needed to get out of this thing before it decided to crush my sub like it had done to Tim's. Something brushed against my hull, just a gentle touch, but it sent my sub spinning sideways into the wall. I straightened out and kept climbing, my hands trembling on the controls. The creature was toying with me. It could have crushed my submarine without effort, but instead it was following me up through the rock towers, reaching out now and then to bump me with limbs I couldn't make out in the black water. I saw a thermal vent in the wall ahead, water rushing upward in a steady current. Without thinking, I aimed my sub into the flow and let it carry me toward the surface faster than my thrusters alone could push me. The creature followed, and now I could hear it moving through the water behind me. Sounds like whale song mixed with something that might have been language, if language could be made of frequencies that hurt to listen to. The walls of the formation were getting narrower as I climbed, or maybe the creature was getting bigger. I couldn't tell anymore. My lights would catch glimpses of tentacles moving alongside me, keeping pace with my ascent, but not quite touching my hull. It was herding me toward the surface. The realization struck me hard. This thing wasn't trying to kill me. It was making sure I escaped. It wanted me to survive, to return to the surface and tell people what I'd seen down here. But why kill Tim and let me live? What made me different? I didn't have time to figure it out. The opening to the ocean above was getting closer, and I could see actual sunlight coming down through normal blue water instead of the thick darkness of the rock formation. My submarine shot out of the circular opening like a cork from a bottle, emergency systems screaming as I rocketed toward the surface 3,000 meters above. I didn't look back to see if the creature followed me out. I just kept climbing toward the light, praying my hull would hold together long enough to reach air and safety and people who might believe what I'd just witnessed in the depths. Behind me, the formation disappeared into blackness, taking its secrets and its guardian back into the deep ocean where they belonged. But I had the awful feeling that this wasn't over, that whatever lived in the hollow had let me escape for a reason, and I was going to find out what that reason was, whether I wanted to or not. I broke the surface gasping, my submarine's hull making awful creaking sounds like it was ready to fall apart. Every alarm in the cabin was going off at once. Pressure warnings, system failures, emergency ascent protocols, all making a horrible noise of mechanical panic. The sunlight hit my viewing port and I actually started crying, which wasn't something I'd ever done after a dive before. The Meridian's edge was already heading toward me, which should have been reassuring except for how fast they were coming, like they'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Surface control, this is Diver 1. I managed to get out between gasps. Emergency ascent complete. Tim didn't make it. There's something down there. Something that... Diver 1, maintain position for immediate retrieval. Julie's voice cut through my radio, calm and professional, like I'd just reported a minor equipment malfunction instead of watching my partner get crushed by something that shouldn't exist. The ship's crane was already moving toward me, which meant they'd started pulling me up before I'd even reached the surface. How did they know I was coming up alone? My submarine jerked as the crane's cables locked onto my hull. I tried the radio again, needing to tell them about the creature, about the walls that moved like they were breathing, about how Tim had been stuck in place with fear before something huge had ripped his sub apart like it was made of paper. Surface control, you need to know what's down there. The formation isn't geological, it's alive, and there's something inside it that... Diver 1. Cease radio communication and prepare for medical evaluation, a different voice interrupted. Male, authoritative, with the kind of tone doctors use when they're about to do something you won't like. The crane pulled my submarine out of the water and onto the ship's deck. Through my viewing port, I could see personnel in military gear waiting for me. But they weren't moving like a rescue crew. They were positioned like a containment team. The hatch release mechanism engaged from the outside before I could reach for it myself. Cold Atlantic air rushed into my cabin, along with the sound of boots on metal decking and voices giving orders I couldn't quite make out. "Ma'am, please exit the vehicle slowly and keep your hands visible," someone called out. I climbed out of my submarine on wobbly legs, still trying to wrap my head around what I'd seen down there. The deck crew closed in on me right away, not offering help, just forming a circle, as if they figured I might bolt or throw a punch. "I need to report what happened down there," I said to the nearest person, a tall black man in a white coat who was approaching with a medical bag. "Tim Singh is dead. Something killed him. There's a creature in that formation that..." "Ms. Wheeler, I'm Dr. Ryder Adams," the man said, setting his bag down and pulling out a syringe. "We need to get you to medical immediately for evaluation." "I don't need medical evaluation. I need to tell you what's down there," I said, backing away from him. "There's something alive in that formation, something massive, and it killed Tim right in front of me." Dr. Adams kept coming closer with the syringe, and now I could see armed guards moving to block any way out. This wasn't a rescue. This was a capture. "The sedative will help with the trauma response," Dr. Adams said, like he was explaining a routine procedure. "You've been exposed to extreme psychological stress, and we need to monitor your condition." "I haven't been exposed to psychological stress. I've been exposed to something that defies every law of physics," I snapped, still backing away. "And why are you talking about sedatives before you've even asked me what happened?" Julie Reynolds appeared at the edge of the group, watching the whole scene with that same cold expression she'd worn during our first meeting. She nodded to Dr. Adams, who suddenly moved much faster than I expected for someone his age. The needle went into my arm before I could pull away, and I felt the drug hit my system almost immediately. My legs went weak, and my vision started to blur around the edges. "This is wrong," I managed to say, as two crew members caught me before I could fall. "You already know what's down there, don't you? You've sent other people into that thing." "Rest now, Ms. Wheeler," Dr. Adams said, his voice becoming distant and echoing. "We'll discuss everything once you've had time to process the experience." The last thing I saw before the sedative pulled me under was Julie Reynolds checking her watch like she was timing something. Like my collapse was just another data point in whatever experiment they were running. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was that I couldn't move my arms. I was lying in a hospital bed in what looked like a medical bay, with monitoring equipment beeping softly around me and restraints holding my wrists to the bed rails. The room was bright white with no windows, just fluorescent lights that made everything look harsh and cold. My mouth felt like cotton and my head was throbbing from whatever they'd given me. I tried to remember how long I'd been out, but the drugs had scrambled my sense of time completely. The door opened and Dr. Adams walked in, followed by Julie Reynolds. Both of them looked well rested and alert, while I'd been knocked out cold. "Good morning, Ms. Wheeler," Dr. Adams said, checking the monitors around my bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been drugged and tied to a bed against my will," I said, pulling against the restraints. "Why can't I move my arms?" Standard precaution after deep-sea trauma exposure, he replied, making notes on a clipboard. We need to monitor your physical and psychological responses before determining appropriate treatment. Julie stepped closer to the bed, her expression giving nothing away. We need to discuss what you experienced during your dive, Karen. But first, I have to tell you that Tim Singh's submarine was recovered about 4 hours ago. He didn't make it. The way she said it was so matter-of-fact, so clinical, that it took me a second to process what she meant. Tim was dead. I'd watched him die, but hearing it confirmed made something cold settle in my stomach. You're talking about his death like you expected it, I said, studying both their faces. Like this was a predictable outcome. Dr. Adams and Julie shared a quick glance that lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it revealed everything I needed to know. They weren't surprised by Tim's death. They weren't even really bothered by it. We need your account of what happened in the formation, Julie said, pulling out a recording device. Every detail you can remember, starting from when you entered the opening. First, you tell me why I'm restrained like a prisoner instead of being debriefed like a survivor, I said. And you explain why you sedated me before I could report what I saw down there. You've been exposed to something that requires careful monitoring, Dr. Adams said, adjusting one of the machines. Previous subjects have experienced delayed psychological reactions that can be dangerous to themselves and others. Earlier test cases, not earlier divers or earlier staff members. Test cases. How many other people have you sent into that thing? I asked, feeling ice form in my veins. How many other divers have you watched die while you took notes? Julie's professional mask slipped for just a moment, and I caught something that could have been regret or guilt flash across her face before she got control of herself again. Your account needs to be properly documented before we can discuss the broader scope of the project, she said. What you experienced down there is classified at the highest levels, and your testimony will help us understand how to proceed. Proceed with what? Sending more people down there to get killed? With protecting national security, Julie replied. Now please, tell us exactly what you saw in the formation. I looked at both of them, the doctor with his clipboard and clinical detachment, the intelligence officer with her cold professionalism, and realized that Tim and I had never been explorers or researchers. We'd been test subjects in an experiment they'd been running for who knows how long. And now, I was the only one left to tell them how their latest test had gone. I stared at the ceiling tiles for what felt like hours, counting the tiny holes in each square while machines beeped around me. The restraints were starting to rub my wrists raw, but every time I moved even slightly, Dr. Adams would show up like he'd been monitoring me through some hidden camera. How long are you planning to keep me tied up? I asked when he came in for the 4th time to check my monitors. Until we're confident you won't experience any delayed trauma responses, he said, making more notes on that damn clipboard. Previous subjects have shown unpredictable behavior patterns in the first 24 hours. There it was again. Subjects. How many previous subjects are we talking about? I asked, watching his face carefully. Dr. Adams stopped with his pen halfway to the paper, just for a second, but long enough for me to catch it. We'll discuss that during your formal debriefing. Julie walked in before I could push him further, carrying a thick folder and wearing the same professional look she'd had when she first recruited me. Like nothing had changed, like Tim wasn't dead, like I hadn't just survived something that should have killed me. We need to go through your experience in detail, she said, settling into a chair beside my bed. Every moment from when you entered the formation until you reached the surface. I already told you what happened. You gave us a preliminary account while under sedative influence, Dr. Adams said. We need a complete timeline with specific details about the entity's behavior, the environmental conditions, and your submarine's performance." I looked between them, noting how they both had their notebooks ready, how they'd positioned themselves on opposite sides of my bed like interrogators. "You're not surprised by any of this, are you? The creature, the living walls, the way physics stopped working down there." Julie's pen stopped moving. "What makes you say that?" "Because you're asking for details about things I haven't described yet. You want to know about the entity's behavior like you already know there's an entity. You're asking about environmental conditions like you know the environment is wrong." Dr. Adams cleared his throat. "Previous exploration attempts have given us some basic information." "How many previous attempts?" I interrupted. The silence went on long enough for me to count 5 beeps from the heart monitor. Julie and Dr. Adams shared another one of those looks that said they were figuring out how much truth I could handle. "Project Hollow has been operational for 3 years, Julie finally said. "You and Tim were part of the 7th diving team sent to investigate the formation." 7th team. My stomach dropped. "What happened to the other 6 teams?" "Various outcomes," Dr. Adams said, which was the kind of non-answer that meant the outcomes were all bad. "Define various." Julie opened her folder and pulled out a sheet of paper covered in names and dates. "Teams 1 through 3, no survivors. Team 4, 1 survivor, relocated for security reasons. Team 5, 2 survivors, currently under medical observation. Team 6, 1 survivor, psychological evaluation ongoing." I stared at the list, doing math I didn't want to do. "How many people total?" 14 divers, Julie said, plus support personnel. Jesus Christ. The machines around my bed started beeping faster as my heart rate spiked. "You've been feeding people to that thing for 3 years?" "We've been attempting to understand a phenomenon that poses potential national security implications," Julie corrected. "Each mission has provided valuable intelligence about the formation and its inhabitants." "Inhabitants plural?" Another pause. Dr. Adams scribbled something on his clipboard like my question was just another data point. "Previous survivors have reported encounters with multiple entities," he said. "Your experience appears consistent with established patterns." The door opened, and a woman I hadn't seen before walked in. She was shorter than Julie, with long black hair and kind eyes that looked genuinely concerned instead of clinically interested. She wore a military uniform with a psychologist's insignia. "This is Dr. Kaylee Simmons," Julie said. "She's been conducting psychological evaluations for Project Hollow survivors." Dr. Simmons pulled up another chair, and now I was really surrounded. "How are you feeling, Karen? I know this has been a lot to take in." "I'm feeling like I've been lied to from the beginning," I said. "And like I'm being treated as a test subject instead of a survivor." "Your feelings are completely valid," Dr. Simmons said, and she actually sounded like she meant it. "What you've experienced is beyond normal human comprehension. Previous survivors have struggled with similar emotions." "Tell me about the previous survivors." Dr. Simmons looked over at Julie, who nodded slightly. "Everyone who's run into these things describes the same weird stuff happening around them. Equipment going haywire, radios cutting out, the whole environment getting twisted somehow. But what it does to people's minds, that's different for everyone." "What kind of psychological effects?" "Recurring nightmares, auditory hallucinations, persistent feelings of being watched," Dr. Simmons said, ticking off items like she was reading from a checklist. "Some survivors report ongoing communication attempts from the entities." The room went completely silent. I could hear my own breathing and the steady beep of monitors, but nobody was moving or speaking. "Communication attempts. Dreams, mostly," Dr. Simmons said carefully. Images or sounds that feel like messages. Previous subjects have described hearing voices in languages they don't recognize, or seeing symbols that seem meaningful but can't be translated. And you think these are actual communications, not just trauma responses? Dr. Adams and Julie shared another glance. Dr. Simmons scooted forward in her chair. We don't know, she said. But the consistency across multiple survivors suggests something more than random psychological trauma. I thought about the voices I'd heard in the static during my dive, those whispered sounds that had almost seemed like language. What happened to the survivors who reported these communications? They're being monitored in secure facilities, Julie said, for their own safety and for national security. Secure facilities. That was government speak for prison. So, my choices are what exactly? I asked. Cooperate with your research or disappear into a secure facility. Your choices depend on your psychological evaluation and security assessment, Julie said. Dr. Simmons will be conducting those evaluations over the next few days. Days? Standard protocol requires 72 hours of observation, Dr. Adams said. We need to monitor for delayed onset symptoms and assess your long-term stability. I tugged at the restraints again, anxiety creeping up my throat. I want a lawyer. I need to call my family. What are my legal rights here? Your legal status is complicated by the classified nature of your experience, Julie said. But we're not holding you against your will. You're here for medical evaluation and debriefing. Then take off these restraints. After the initial observation period, Dr. Adams said. Dr. Simmons was watching me with those worried eyes, and I got the feeling she was the only person in the room who saw me as a human being instead of a data source. Karen, she said quietly, I know this feels like imprisonment, but we genuinely need to understand what you've been through. Not just for research purposes, but because we don't know what long-term effects exposure to the entities might have. What do you mean, long-term effects? Previous survivors have experienced changes in brain activity, alterations in sleep patterns, enhanced sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, Dr. Adams said. We need to monitor your neurological function to ensure your safety. Enhanced sensitivity to electromagnetic fields. Some subjects report being able to sense electronic devices, radio transmissions, even cellular phone signals, Dr. Simmons explained. It's as if exposure to the entities has altered their nervous systems in ways we don't understand. I thought about how my instruments had gone haywire in the formation, how the radio static had seemed almost alive. Are you saying the creatures did something to me? We're saying we don't know what they did, Julie said, which is why we need your cooperation to find out. The machines around my bed beeped steadily while I processed this information. I wasn't just a survivor of a diving accident. I was potentially a carrier of some kind of alien influence, a walking experiment that needed to be studied and contained. The formation, I said. When did it first appear? 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago, Julie said without checking her notes. Deep-sea monitoring stations detected massive seismic activity in an area that had been mapped as normal ocean floor just 6 months earlier. What kind of seismic activity? The kind that doesn't match any known geological process, Dr. Adams said. The formation appeared overnight, fully formed, with no gradual development or warning signs. Something created it, I said. Something created it, Julie agreed. And we need to understand what, why, and whether it represents a threat to national security. I looked at each of them. The intelligence officer with her classified folders, the doctor with his clinical detachment, the psychologist with her genuine concern, and knew I was never going to be allowed to just walk away from this. Whatever had happened to me in the hollow, Whatever the creature had done by letting me escape, I was now part of Project Hollow, whether I wanted to be or not. "How long before you decide whether I'm a security risk?" I asked. "That depends on your evaluation results," Julie said. "And if I am considered a security risk? Then we'll discuss appropriate measures to protect both you and national security interests." Dr. Simmons reached over and loosened one of my restraints a bit. "Try to rest, Karen. Tomorrow we'll start the official evaluation, and you'll get a clearer picture of where things stand." They walked out, leaving me alone with the beeping machines and the growing certainty that my old life was finished. Whatever that thing in the hollow had wanted from me, whatever message it was trying to send by letting me walk away, I was about to become the government's best shot at understanding it. And if I couldn't give them the answers they were looking for, I had a feeling I'd end up with the other survivors in whatever locked-down place they kept people who knew too much about things that weren't supposed to be real. I stared at the ceiling for another hour before Julie returned, this time carrying a laptop and looking like someone who'd finally decided to stop pretending. Dr. Adams and Dr. Simmons followed her in, and the way they positioned themselves around my bed felt different. Less like medical staff, more like people about to deliver news that would change everything. "We need to show you something," Julie said, opening the laptop and angling the screen toward me. Full disclosure about what Project Hollow actually is. The video that started playing was grainy surveillance footage, timestamp showing it was recorded 8 months ago. I watched a submarine descending through dark water, its lights cutting through the same pitch-black depths I'd experienced. The diver's voice came through crackling radio static, reporting instrument malfunctions and temperature changes that matched exactly what Tim and I had encountered. "This is Team 5. Mission Day 1, Julie said. "Watch what happens when they reach the bottom of the formation." The submarine's lights lit up something huge moving through the black water. Not the same creature I'd seen before, but something just as enormous with different features. More angular, covered in what looked like metal plating instead of scales. The diver's breathing turned quick and panicked as the thing got closer, but instead of attacking, it seemed to be examining the submarine. "Jesus, it's trying to communicate," the diver's voice said through the static. "It's making patterns with those lights on its head, like it's trying to tell me something." The creature's glowing patterns pulsed in intricate sequences that were clearly intentional. The same design repeated 3 times before the being drifted closer to the submarine, reaching what looked like an arm toward the hull. "Team 5, aboard immediately," came Julie's voice through the radio. "No, wait. I think it's trying to..." The feed cut to black. Julie closed the laptop and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. That diver survived. Both members of Team 5 made it to the surface and reported similar experiences. The entities weren't hunting them. They were trying to make contact. Contact with what purpose? I asked, though part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Dr. Adams pulled out a different folder, this one marked with security classifications I'd never seen before. "We believe the formation is an artificial construct, not geological, not natural. Something created that opening in the ocean floor as a gateway or access point." "Gateway to what?" "We don't know," Julie said. "But the entities appear to be guardians or inhabitants of whatever lies beyond the opening. They've demonstrated advanced intelligence, complex social structures, and technology that defies our understanding of physics." Dr. Simmons leaned forward. "Karen, what you experienced wasn't a random encounter with deep-sea life. You were being evaluated by an intelligence that's been studying human behavior for 3 years." The machines around my bed started beeping faster as my pulse quickened. Evaluated for what? Julie opened another file and spread photographs across my bed. Sonar images, thermal readings, electromagnetic signatures, all showing the formation from different angles and time periods. The opening has been expanding, she said. Slowly, but measurably. 3 years ago it was 180 meters across. Last month it measured 215 meters. Whatever's down there is making the gateway larger. I stared at the sequence of photos, watching the perfect circle expand bit by bit over time. You think they're getting ready for something? We think they're preparing to come up, Dr. Adams said. The question is whether that represents first contact or invasion. And you've been sending people down there to find out. We've been attempting to establish communication protocols, Julie corrected. Each mission has provided more intelligence about their capabilities and intentions. How many people have died for your intelligence gathering? The silence stretched long enough for me to count 10 beeps on the monitor. Dr. Simmons was the one who finally answered. 43 personnel over 3 years, she said quietly. Divers, submarine pilots, support staff. Some were killed by the entities, others died from equipment failures or psychological breaks. 43 people. I thought about Tim's sub getting crushed like a tin can, about the look of terror frozen on his face, about how that could have just as easily been me down there. But some survived, I said. 11 survivors total, Dr. Adams said, including you. And every survivor has reported the same thing. The entities let them escape. They could have been killed, but they were allowed to return to the surface. Why? Julie pulled out another laptop and opened a different video file. This one showed a debriefing room similar to where I was now, with a man in his 30s strapped to a hospital bed. His eyes were wide and unfocused, and he was speaking rapidly in a language I didn't recognize. This is Marcus Webb, Team 4 survivor, Julie said. Recorded 6 weeks after his encounter. He's been speaking in what linguists believe might be the entity's language. The man on screen kept talking fast in a language I couldn't understand, stopping now and then to trace shapes in the air with his tied hands. The designs were complicated geometric forms that appeared to move and transform as he made them. He doesn't remember learning this language, Dr. Simmons said. He claims the knowledge just appeared in his mind after his encounter. Brain scans show unusual activity in areas associated with language processing and memory formation. You're saying the creatures put information in his head. We're saying exposure to the entities appears to create lasting neurological changes, Dr. Adams said. Changes that might represent attempted communication or something else entirely. Julie started another video, this one showing a woman in her 40s sitting calmly in a similar medical room. Unlike Marcus Webb, she looked completely clear-headed and in control. This is Dr. Sarah Chen, Team 6 survivor, Julie said. She's been reporting ongoing contact with the entities through dreams and meditation. The woman on screen spoke directly to the camera, her voice calm and professional. They're not hostile, she said. They're trying to warn us about something. The expansion of the gateway isn't preparation for invasion. It's preparation for evacuation. Evacuation from what? The interviewer's voice asked. Something's coming, Dr. Chen replied. Something that threatens both their civilization and ours. They're trying to establish communication so we can work together when it arrives. Julie paused the video and looked at me intently. Dr. Chen was a marine biologist before her encounter. PhD from Stanford, 20 years of research experience, completely stable psychological profile. She's not delusional or traumatized. She's reporting what she believes to be factual information she got from these things. And you believe her? We believe something is communicating with our survivors, Dr. Adams said. Whether that communication is accurate or represents some form of psychological manipulation is what we're trying to determine. Dr. Simmons pulled out a chart covered in brain scan images. Every survivor shows similar changes in their brain activity. More action in areas tied to pattern recognition, heightened electromagnetic sensitivity, messed up sleep cycles. It's like exposure to these things rewires how human brains work. I looked at the brain scans, noting the highlighted areas that supposedly showed alien influence. What kind of electromagnetic sensitivity? Survivors report being able to sense electronic devices, radio transmissions, even satellite communications, Dr. Adams said. Some claim they can hear digital signals as actual voices or music. That's impossible. 6 months ago, we would have said intelligent life in deep ocean trenches was impossible, Julie said. Now we're documenting evidence of technology that operates outside known physical laws. She opened one final video file, this one showing underwater footage from a military submarine. The camera focused on the formation's opening, but instead of the dark void I'd experienced, the entrance pulsed with intricate patterns of light. This was recorded last week, Julie said. The entities have been creating increasingly elaborate light displays, always when our monitoring equipment is present. They know we're watching, and they're trying to communicate. The light patterns were beautiful and terrifying, geometric shapes that flowed and changed in ways that suggested meaning beyond human understanding. Watching them made something in my brain itch, like I was on the edge of grasping something important, but couldn't quite reach it. Your escape wasn't luck, Karen, Dr. Simmons said gently. The entity that killed Tim could have killed you just as easily. Instead, it followed you to the surface and let you go. You were chosen to survive. Chosen for what? That's what we need to find out, Julie said. Because if Dr. Chen is right, if something is coming that threatens both civilizations, then the survivors might be our only hope of establishing meaningful contact before it's too late. I stared at the frozen image of alien lights dancing in the depths, understanding that my dive into the hollow hadn't been the end of anything. It had been the beginning. Whatever the creatures wanted from humanity, whatever message they were trying to send, I was now part of their plan, whether I wanted to be or not. And the most scary part was that I could feel something changing in my mind, some new awareness growing stronger every hour I spent away from the depths. The creatures hadn't just let me escape. They'd sent me back with something that was slowly waking up in my brain. The silence after the video ended felt heavier than the water pressure at 3,000 meters. Julie closed the laptop with a soft click and watched my face like she was checking instrument readings. "We need you to go back down," she said. The words knocked the breath out of me. "What?" "Your successful escape demonstrates a unique compatibility with the entities," Dr. Adams said, consulting his clipboard like he was discussing routine medical procedures. "Previous survivors either barely escaped or were actively rescued by emergency protocols. You navigated the encounter independently and maintained operational capability throughout." I stared at them, waiting for the punchline that wasn't coming. "You want me to go back to the thing that killed Tim?" "We want you to establish meaningful contact," Julie said. "The entities clearly responded differently to you than to previous divers. That suggests potential for actual communication rather than just observation. Are you completely insane?" I pulled against the restraints hard enough to make the bed frame rattle. "I barely survived. Tim didn't survive at all. And you want me to go back for a chat?" Dr. Simmons leaned forward, worry creasing his face. "Karen, I get why you're upset, but think about what we've discovered. These things aren't just attacking everyone. They're choosing who to go after. Something about you made them react differently." "Yeah. They decided to play with their food before eating it." Or they recognized something in you that made them spare your life, Julie said. Something worth investigating. The machines around my bed started beeping faster as my heart rate jumped. I'm not going back down there. I don't care what you think you learned or what you need to investigate. Find someone else for your suicide mission. Julie and Dr. Adams exchanged one of their looks. Dr. Simmons changed position uncomfortably in her chair as if she knew what was coming next and didn't like it. There's something else you need to know, Julie said, opening a different folder. About why you were specifically selected for this mission. I thought you picked me because of my deep water experience. That was part of it, Julie said, but not the primary reason. She pulled out a photograph and placed it on my bed. Black and white, official military portrait, showing a man in his 40s with familiar green eyes and the same stubborn jawline I saw in mirrors. My father. Patrick Wheeler was part of the first diving team sent to investigate the hollow, Julie said, 3 years, 2 months, and 18 days ago. The room started spinning. I couldn't breathe properly, like my regulator had broken and I was getting bad air. That's impossible. My father died in a commercial diving accident off the Grand Banks. Your father volunteered for a classified mission and never returned to the surface, Dr. Adams said. The cover story about the commercial accident was necessary to protect operational security. You're lying. Julie pulled out more documents, mission briefings, personnel files, medical records. Every single one had my father's name and signature. Every single one was dated 3 years ago. Patrick Wheeler was selected for the initial reconnaissance mission based on his exceptional deep water capabilities and psychological profile, she said. He was part of a 2-man team tasked with preliminary exploration of the formation. I stared at the papers, recognizing Dad's handwriting on the medical forms, his signature on the mission acceptance documents. What happened to him? His submarine was recovered empty, Dr. Adams said. No body, no signs of struggle, no indication of hull breach or system failure. He simply vanished during the dive. But his partner survived? Julie hesitated. His partner reported that Patrick seemed to be talking with one of the entities before both submarines lost contact with the surface. When rescue teams reached the formation, they found one submarine floating empty and the other completely missing. The heart monitor was beeping so fast it sounded like an alarm. You think the creatures took him? We think Patrick Wheeler survived longer in the hollow than any diver before or since, Julie said. His mission lasted 6 hours and 43 minutes before contact was lost. Most divers are killed or forced to surface within 30 minutes. And you think that's genetic? We think whatever allowed your father to survive extended contact with the entities might be hereditary, Dr. Adams said. Your successful escape supports that hypothesis. I closed my eyes, trying to wrap my head around what she'd just told me. My father hadn't died in some random accident. He'd been recruited for the same kind of mission that had just killed Tim. The government had been watching my family for 3 years, waiting to see if I'd inherited whatever trait had kept him alive longer than the others. How long have you been monitoring me? Since your father's disappearance, Julie said. We've tracked your diving career, your financial situation, your personal relationships. When we determined you had the necessary skills and psychological profile, we initiated contact. You manipulated me into this. We offered you an opportunity that aligned with your existing capabilities and financial needs, Julie corrected. You fed me to the same thing that took my father. Dr. Simmons was looking more and more uncomfortable. Karen, we honestly thought your genetic makeup would keep you safe. Protection? I laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. Tim is dead. 43 other people are dead. My father is missing and probably dead. What exactly did your genetic theory protect? It protected you, Dr. Adams said.
You survived an encounter that should have been fatal. That's not luck or coincidence.
Julie leaned forward. That's exactly why we need you to go back. If there's something genetic about surviving contact with those things, you could be our only shot at actually talking to them. I'm not going back. The entities are expanding their territory, Julie said. The formation grows larger every month. If Dr. Chen is right about something coming, we need to understand their intentions before they reach the surface. Find another way. There is no other way, Dr. Adams said. 11 survivors out of 54 personnel. You're one of only 3 survivors who maintained operational capability during entity contact. The others either barely escaped or suffered complete psychological breaks. Then maybe that's your answer. Maybe humans aren't supposed to be down there. Julie pulled out another photo, this one taken from above with measurements marked on it. The opening has grown 35 meters in the past 3 months. At this rate, it'll be big enough for the creatures to reach the surface in 18 months. So evacuate the area. And then what? Julie asked. Hope they stay in the North Atlantic. Hope they're not interested in coastal populations or shipping lanes. Hope Dr. Chen is wrong about something coming that threatens both civilizations. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting holes and trying to think of any response that didn't involve going back into that nightmare. What happened to my father's mission recordings? Lost during a server failure 6 months after his disappearance, Dr. Adams said. How convenient. Dr. Simmons cleared her throat. Actually, that's not entirely accurate. Julie's head snapped toward her. Dr. Simmons... She has a right to know about her father, Dr. Simmons said, pulling a small data drive from her pocket. I made a backup copy before the files were purged. Julie shot up from her chair, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. That's classified material. So is everything else we've shown her, Dr. Simmons said, placing the drive on my bed. If we're asking her to risk her life, she deserves to see what happened to Patrick Wheeler. Dr. Adams was already reaching for the drive, but Dr. Simmons blocked his hand. The footage might help her understand why those things acted differently around her family. Or it might compromise operational security, Julie said. What operational security? I asked. You just told me my father disappeared 3 years ago, and you want me to follow him into the same hole. What exactly are you protecting? Julie and Dr. Adams were locked in some kind of wordless battle, their eyes doing all the talking. Dr. Simmons took advantage of the tension to quietly slide the data drive under my pillow. The choice is yours, Karen, Julie said finally. Cooperate with future missions and potentially learn what happened to your father, or accept relocation under a new identity with the understanding that the Hollow continues to expand regardless of your decision. Relocation? Witness protection protocols, Dr. Adams explained. New name, new location, new life. Complete separation from your previous identity and any knowledge of Project Hollow. And if I refuse both options? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. People who knew about the Hollow didn't get to just walk away and go back to their normal lives. I need time to think, I said. You have until tomorrow morning, Julie said, gathering her files. The helicopter will be ready at 0800 hours regardless of your decision. They filed out, leaving me alone with the data drive tucked under my pillow, and the sinking realization that my life as Karen Wheeler was finished no matter what I chose. I could become a lab rat for their alien contact experiments, or I could vanish into witness protection and spend the rest of my days wondering what happened to my father. But first, I was going to find out what was on that drive. I waited 20 minutes before carefully pulling the data drive out from under my pillow. The laptop Julie had left behind was still sitting on the bedside table, probably another test to see what I'd do when left alone with classified information. The drive contained a single video file labeled Wheeler P. Mission Final MP4. I opened it and watched my father descend into the same darkness that had nearly killed me. The footage was clearer than the other mission videos, showing Dad's submarine moving through the formation's entrance with the same instrument failures and environmental distortions I'd experienced. But his voice stayed calm and professional throughout the dive, reporting what he saw like he was conducting routine research instead of plunging into an alien nightmare. Depth readings inconsistent, but sonar indicates I'm approaching the bottom of the formation, his voice said through the static. Water temperature showing significant variations. Visibility is unusual. The water seems to be absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The camera showed the same living walls I'd seen, throbbing with glowing patterns. But Dad's submarine moved through the space with confidence, like he understood something about the environment that I'd missed. "There's definitely something large moving ahead," he reported. "Multiple contacts, actually. They appear to be maintaining distance but following my descent." The massive creature appeared on camera, the same incredible size and alien features that had terrified me. But Dad's submarine didn't retreat or panic. Instead, he steered closer to the entity, his lights lighting up the enormous eyes that had watched me with such intelligence. "Remarkable," Dad's voice said. "It's definitely observing me, but not aggressively." The bioluminescent displays appear to be some form of communication attempt. The creature's lights pulsed in complex patterns, and Dad's submarine responded by flashing its external floods in what looked like an answering sequence. The thing moved closer, reaching out toward his hull the same way it had come toward me. "I think it's trying to establish contact," Dad said. "The light patterns are too complex to be random. There's definitely intelligence here." The creature's appendages touched Dad's submarine, and something incredible happened. The hull started glowing with the same bright patterns as the entity, like some kind of energy transfer was happening. Dad's voice got excited, almost breathless. "It's sharing information," he said. "I can see images, concepts, warnings about something coming from deep space. They're not hostile. They're refugees. They're trying to warn us about..." The feed cut to static. I stared at the blank screen, my father's final words repeating in my mind. Refugees. Warnings about something from deep space. The creatures weren't invaders. They were survivors of something worse. And my father had been trying to help them communicate that message when he disappeared. I ejected the drive and tucked it back under my pillow, finally understanding why those things had let me walk away. They'd seen something in me that connected to my father, some inherited trait or mental link that made communication possible. But I also knew that heading back down there wouldn't just put my life on the line. It would put my humanity at stake. Whatever had happened to Dad during that last contact, whatever those creatures had shown him, it had changed him so completely that he'd never come back to the surface. The real question was whether discovering what happened to him was worth becoming the government's next guinea pig in their ongoing tests with alien contact. I closed my eyes and tried to picture spending the rest of my life as someone else, always wondering what had happened to Patrick Wheeler, and whether those things would eventually come up to deliver their warning on their own terms. The helicopter would be ready at 0800 hours. I had until dawn to decide whether I was Karen Wheeler, deep sea diver, or someone else entirely.